All right, we now welcome on to the podcast Tyler. It's been a little bit of time since we've had a guest on the pod,
Yes, sir.
probably preseason, but we got a great one right here. For those of you that do not know who he is, you've probably heard his name plenty of times during the broadcast, as mentioned by Michael Kay, Paul O'Neill, David Cohn, whoever's in the booth, Ryan Rucco, all those guys. James Smyth, the booth statistician and stats guy for the New York Yankees and the Yes Network. James, how we doing? We appreciate you coming on and spending some time with us, man.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Yeah, shout out to my brother Rich, who's also a part of the Yes Network, that was able to kind of set us up and put us in contact. So that was good on him for connecting us. And now we can talk about some stats around the baseball, New York Yankees, around the league. I know we got some stuff to get in with the sticky substances and everything, but to talk a little bit more about this team, James, the question that I'll start off with is what, this has been a kind of up and down season to begin with the Yankees. You know, we've had a long stretch of series wins, and then we fell into a very dark place, especially on this podcast. Me and Tyler will go on and talk about the,
sounds like a funeral on here.
Yes, it'll be not the greatest time for us talking about the Yankees, and we see it on social media, especially on Twitter and stuff, of a lot of fan opinions going around. But going back to it, so there's a lot of highs with this team, a lot of lows. What are kind of the stats that you've seen in 2021, maybe in 2020 as well, because it was kind of a similar stretch with them and the way they were playing a little bit there with the inconsistency. But what's kind of something that you've seen in 2021 in relation to the previous seasons in 2018 or 2019, something that stands out to you possibly?
Well, just generally the offense, and what was so jarring to see such a slow start this year was that this was a team that was in the top, 1, 2, 3, 4 teams in most offensive categories for the entire, we will call it like the baby bombers era, this from 2017 on. They were, around the top of the league and everything. And then to see them come out of the gate so poorly at the plate was really jarring. And going into the season, I'm sure a lot of folks might have had question marks about the starting pitching behind Garrett Cole. For the most part, up until this last couple of weeks, they've been pretty good. The bullpen's great as always, but the offense coming up short was what was really a big surprise. One thing that I think we've all seen is that in the last couple of weeks, we're starting to see a lot of these guys come back around, because it's kind of easy to bank on that, where these are the same guys. You go up and down the lineup. These are the same guys that have been here the last couple of years. It's not like they got in a bunch of new guys and the replacements are all doing poorly. It's DJ LeMahieu, Aaron Judge, Luke Voigt is back, which is great to see. But the offense coming around in these last couple of weeks, I think the last game against Boston, they lost and they got swept, but they were starting, they scored 5 runs. That was when they broke that streak of, they had, 3 runs a game or fewer for a couple of weeks there. And they turned that around. So it was starting with that, then the Minnesota series. They lost a couple of games in Philly, but the offense was, scoring some runs there. It was just bad starts by Tyone and Herman there. But the offense has been starting to get back on track. Even with the first Royals game, they scored 5 runs, which is usually enough to win. But that was just the one random game that all of a sudden Weisiger doesn't have it. Yeah. What can you do about that? But I think the promising thing moving forward is that the offense is looking more like the offense from the last couple of years, where, they're having better at bats, they're putting some more runs on the board. And even though the pitching has taken a step back the last couple of weeks, I feel like that's a little more correctable. And then the offense sticking with what they're doing, it's trending up. They were in the bottom 5 in many categories this year. And now they're slowly but surely clicking their way up the rankings there. So even in the last 2.5 weeks since that the last Boston game they're in the top 10 in home runs, average, slugging, on base percentage, runs per game. That's the Yankee offense we're used to seeing.
Yeah, we can kind of only hope that. I mean, it's good to see that they're at least putting up runs on the board, but there still are definitely some I think as we can probably all agree on some glaring, I don't know, struggles in this lineup. Just to kind of to point one out that I'm sure we're all wondering about moving forward. What's kind of going on with center field? What do you think? Do we have? I know we have guys internally that they can call up, but I'm not necessarily too confident that they will. Just based on track record and things that they've done in the past. Do you think that they go out and get a center fielder, or do you think that they, I know Hoya John Park made a couple starts in center field, making his second in a row today. So just some things I'm looking out for. I don't know if they kind of think that's a solution in center, or what are kind of your thoughts on that?
The Park move is interesting because he's been raking
Yeah.
in the minors, and I'm sure they're thinking, hey, if we can get him over in center field, and if he can fake it out there, maybe he can provide a little spark. Something a little more, I don't know, long term maybe is the trade market, and
Yeah.
I mean you have to think that they're going to be active there. The question is well, one, how quickly is the trade market going to develop? Because we're still 6 weeks away from the trade deadline, and the need is a little more immediate. But if you start looking at some of the the big circle names that fans and people are talking about with Ketel Marte, Starling Marte, or whatever, maybe those guys might not be moved right away. Maybe the teams are going to be waiting to see, what they can get from teams, and what kind of holding out a little longer until they get closer to the deadline. Meanwhile, the Yankees are still struggling in center field with some of the lowest production at the position across the board. So as far as the trade market goes, you have to think that they're going to be pretty active. And I mean, for me, Ketel Marte is at the top of the list. The question there too, though, is
pricey
do
tag,
the Yankees
right?
do the Yankees have the prospect capital to make that move? And could other teams that are looking for a center fielder or a second baseman, because Marte's played there too, could they beat a Yankee package?
Yeah.
And a lot of the minor league guys that the Yankees have is in the lower minor leagues, which means that they're less likely to be an immediate help.
Yeah. Do you think a team like the D-backs would even be looking for like MLB ready players, or do you think they want someone that maybe develops in like 2024, 2025?
Well, maybe that's a good point. So maybe a team like the Diamondbacks, who are in the middle of a losing 32 out of 35 stretch, which is just staggering.
Not good.
Maybe they matched up well with the Yankees, in that the Yankees might have some, low minors, high reward, higher risk type of lottery ticket type of arms that would appeal to a team like that, saying we're willing to take a quantity of lower level, or at least lower experience prospects, to try and cash in later on.
Yeah, bank on like
as opposed to a team that might be in the middle, that might be selling and saying, well, we'll trade a starting player, but we want a starting player back.
Gotcha.
So kind of sticking with that we got a while, it seems, until that happens. Like you said, 6 weeks until we can possibly get some reinforcements or anything from the trade deadline. But sticking with our guns right now, that Gary Sanchez has been probably there's no debate around it. He's been the hottest hitter in the past month for the Yankees. He's kind of breaking out of the shell, sticking it up to the haters and saying, get out of here. He's been doing his thing, and kind of reminds us of 2016, 2017 Gary. And he's just really putting out good production, especially when you put it in relation to a lot of his peers when it comes to the catching position. And like I've said, if you hit, they're going to find a spot for you. It doesn't matter about, any kind of aspects of the defense that all the Twitter people will be talking about. If you hit, you play. So what are kind of the things you've seen from of Gary Sanchez from this year, as opposed to his maybe possible statistics in past seasons? Anything that you've seen when you've been covering the team?
Well, one thing that really jumps out is he's gone right back to crushing fastballs. For whatever issues people had with Sanchez at the plate over the years, one thing he was always able to do was was smack dingers and take heaters and turn them right around. And during the first few years of his career through 2019, when he was absolutely one of the best, maybe the best hitting catcher in the game.
Yeah.
He was hitting fastballs really well. Average over 250, slugging 569. That's the Gary we know and love. Last year, from last year through the start of this year, right before this big hot streak started, he hit 179 against fastballs. That's so far away from what he used to do.
Un-Gary-like.
Un-Gary-like. So you say, is it just a small sample? Because that previous run was, over 350 games. Now we take the short 60-game season and the early season slump. That's 80 games. If that's during a normal season, you might say, oh, wow, this guy had a bad couple of months. But because it's a shortened season last year and the first month and a half of this year, people were freaking out.
Yeah.
So now we've had a month where he's hitting over 300 again against fastballs. He's slugging over 600 against fastballs.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the Gary that we're used to seeing. You've seen, and they've talked about, modifying his leg kick a little shorter, gets his timing right. That's something that looks like has really helped. But I think the biggest thing, and it's great to see because I have long been a big Gary Sanchez defender, high and low, even through the downs of last year. It's great to see him back and also see that because of the work that he's put in and for as much as fans in the press, a lot of folks will say he's lazy and all this, he was a player who was struggling and nobody doubted the amount of work that he put in. So it's good to see that rewarded. The key though is that from 2015 to 2019, this was a guy who was the best hitting catcher in the game. So 2016, 17, 18 he was injured for a good chunk of the year, but he came right back in 2019 and hit 34 bombs, and he looked like the Gary from 16 and 17.
Mm-hmm.
So that seemed like he's more reestablishing himself as one of the best catchers. So he had 3 wins above replacement in 3 out of 4 years before last season. And then last year was a mess. But he also didn't really have any time to correct himself. You see a lot of big star players last year struggled in, playing 50 or 60 games. Jose Altuve, JD Martinez. JD's a guy who came right back this year, having a monster year. Typical JD Martinez, right?
Mm-hmm.
We'll be seeing him this weekend. He's a scary guy every time he comes up.
Yeah.
But for Gary,
rushing the ball.
It's just a matter of, I think water finds its level. He was one of the best hitting catchers in the game, and now he's getting back to that. I guess it was just a matter of time until it kind of balanced back out.
Yeah. Gotcha. And to the point that Tyler made on our last podcast is we like to see when he's hitting the opposite field a lot too. It was like there was a tweet out that I saw of mirroring the go ahead double against Oakland to the 2017 ALCS ALCS. Yeah. So, that's what we love to see, especially when a good hitter like that is taking the ball the other way. Shifting to another player that's been having even more struggles now. He came back well when he had COVID, and then he got back and Gleyber started to hit a little bit, but we've been seeing now more so with more time into June that he's been struggling once again. And it's no kind of, you can clearly see by the power numbers in past years, this is a guy that stroked, 38 home runs in a season. This guy, who knows if it's a factor of the juice baseballs, possibly. But, we could still see that he's able to, be a possible, extra base hitter, and he's able to string some, good hitting together. But maybe the power hasn't necessarily been there. What's some things that you've seen with Gleyber from your point of view that you've seen that why he's been playing the way or hitting the way he's been?
Honestly, it is a head scratcher because when you see a player start off so well at such a young age, that is setting a precedent for historical dominance.
Yeah.
And then to see him struggle at the plate for a good chunk of time, what are the red flags you look for? Is he striking out a lot more? He's not. Other than this last, week and a half, where he's looked a little lost at the plate. The first Royals game where he had 4 strikeouts, that's not like the Glaber we know. So the strikeouts have ticked up there, but for the season, he's only struck out 20% of the time. So and the average is 24-25%. So all right, he's striking out less than average. He's still drawing his walks. The MLB walk rate's around 9%. He's in double digits, which is nice to see. So it's not that either. You say, okay, well, is he chasing pitches out of the zone more often? That's one that I'll always look at to explain a hitter's, either a guy who's suddenly struggling or a guy who's really turned things around and has gotten hot. You say, are they chasing pitches outside the zone more often? In Glaber's case, he's not. He's always been one of the better guys in the league at laying off pitchers' pitches and attacking pitches in the zone. He's done that pretty well this year. The thing that's so striking with me is looking at some of the StatCast info, and you see when he hits the ball, it's just not going anywhere like it was. His average exit velocity, comparing 2018 and 19, his first 2 big seasons, to the last 2 seasons, it's down a couple miles an hour. Mm-hmm. His barrel rate, which is quantifying the best contact, what is the kind of exit velocity and launch angle that gives you home runs, doubles, hits in the gap, those kinds of things. Those numbers are way down. And there isn't really a big explanation. I wish that it could be something where you go, aha, it's because of this.
Yeah.
But it really isn't. And it's confusing because this was a guy who established himself in the big leagues at 22 years old. And you say, okay, historically, guys who hit like that do this. So, and you mentioned, Rob, the juice ball. Mm-hmm. Now, a lot of guys had out of nowhere big home run years in 2019. It was, maybe it was one of the most homer happy seasons in baseball.
Brett Gardner was hitting like close to 30 home runs.
Yeah. Right, 27. So now, okay, so a lot of guys had a little out of nowhere seasons. The juice ball might explain why a 20 or 25 homer guy could blow up and have a year with 38.
Yeah.
That wouldn't explain how Glaber, this week he has 3 home runs, and if you were to say, okay, Glaber is 24 in that first year, and then he hits 38, and now if you take last year and this year combined, and put it on a per season, per 600 plate appearances, he's in single digits. He's at 9 home runs per 600 plate appearances. And say, well, how could that be? Now, one great thing and you'll see on Baseball Reference, you'll see OPS plus for a hitter. And that's taking a player's OPS and comparing it to the major league average. So they set it at 100, and any point above or below 100 represents 1% better or 1% worse. So Glaber was a 120 OPS or 125 OPS plus in his first 2 seasons. So that's saying, regardless of juice ball or whatever, compared to the league that season, he was 25% better than the average hitter. That's fantastic. 125 OPS plus. Over the last 2 years, he's below average. He's at 92 OPS plus, which is 8% worse than league average. So if we're looking for a historical precedent for Glaber, a middle infielder, to hit like that in his first 2 seasons through age 22, the precedent that he set, or that he was joining, he was the 11th middle infielder to have a start like he did through his first 2 seasons at such a young age. Some of those guys, Rogers Hornsby, A-Rod, Cal Ripken,
some
Joe
pretty
Morgan.
big names.
These are the big names, there. Right? So it's Eddie Collins, Hall of Famer, Rogers Hornsby, Archie Vaughn from the 1930s, a great Hall of Fame shortstop, Joe Morgan, Cal Ripken, A-Rod. Those are, inner circle Hall of Famer type of guys. Mm-hmm. Carlos Correa is the one other active player who did that, and he's, an all-star. Mm-hmm. And so all of those guys, great players, and even the worst of those guys were perennial all-star type of players. Larry Doyle from the dead ball era, Vern Stevens from around World War II, Red Sox shortstop, and Jim Fregosi, who many people might know as a manager, but he was a pretty good shortstop in his day in the 60s. So there is not a precedent for a player to start a career like he had at his position at such a young age and not become an every year all-star type of guy. So, and maybe it goes a little bit back to what we were talking about with Gary. Maybe you just give it a little more time.
Yeah.
And it'll start to come around. But the lack of power is just striking.
Yeah. It's puzzling to see the way, I know Tyler's the biggest Glaber stan out here.
Yeah. I'm a huge Glaber fan, and I'm not like I don't know, batting average is definitely frowned upon nowadays. But I mean, like you said, just looking at his OPS plus this year, he's sitting at an 85. It's baffling to me that he's 15%, worse of a hitter than the league average hitter. Is his launch angle in the toilet? Like, cause he's still getting singles here and there. He'll have some 3 for 4 days where he hits a few bloopers and rips one up the middle, but nothing in the gap.
His line drive rate is around the same as what it was for most of his career, and you start scanning through his baseball savant page and you say, all right, what's different? What's really down compared to the past? And you say, well, his ground ball. It's not like he's hitting. When Stanton was struggling really early in the season, and you could see watching the games and checking the stats that he was hitting a lot more ground balls. So he would smoke it, 110 miles an hour, big exit velocity, but it's a ground ball to short. So it's a 6-3 or a double play, nice and easy. So you say, okay, well, once he stopped hitting the ground balls, he was smoking line drives and hitting dingers and everything. Okay, he's back to normal. With Glaber, his ground ball rate is not higher, and his line drive rate's around the same. Fly ball rate's similar. So you would expect that there would be, some similar production there, but it's just not all together right there.
Yeah, for sure. Hopefully, give it some more time, like you said, and it'll kind of come around back to, after he got back from the COVID stuff, he was still, he was still contributing in the offense in a good way, not necessarily the same power, but still contributing. And we need to get back to that for Glabe. But shifting to the pitching side, and we know when we're recording this is in the middle of the series, so it's on Wednesday prior to the game 2. So let's knock on wood that hopefully that the boys come through for us.
Holds together.
Yeah. So it was a bad loss last night. Just say keep it at that. So shifting to the pitching side, we know that last night was the first and Monday, but at least for the Yankees was the first time that the MLB was cracking down on the sticky stuff for all the pitchers. So we saw with Joe Girardi and Max Scherzer going at it for the Nationals Phillies. And we saw, I think, how many Cole got checked? I think 2. Did he get 3 times or twice?
At least 2 times, maybe even a third, and the Royals pitchers were 2.
Yeah. So
you're seeing it all around. They're not going to do it every inning, but they're going to be doing it, pretty regularly.
Yeah. Sergio Romo was very funny,
Yeah, that was hilarious.
That was great. Scherzer too.
Yeah. So my question for you, James, when it comes to that is, has there, when, obviously you've been paying attention to it with seeing the difference in with spin rate with the ball and stuff, and Cole, I think that when me and Tyler recorded after for the first game, that it was kind of looked at by his press conference that we don't really need to talk about how he just kind of looked guilty through that, but the time after that with the spin rate, I think it was very much down they played the Blue Jays, right? And then the spin rate was pretty high, close to like 600 RPMs, I think it was. If I can remember the numbers correctly, I'm probably a little off. But they went like very down to next to the Blue Jays game. And then when it came back to Minnesota, it came closer to his start prior to the Blue Jays game. And it's still down from where it was prior. But is there any because clearly we could see the trends that the RPMs are going down with the sticky stuff, getting cracked down on. But has there been anything that you've kind of seen that may listeners would kind of look to point to a little bit when it comes to the sticky stuff or anything like that?
Right. And well, no doubt the spin rate is down. And we're seeing that for a lot of pitchers around the league. So Cole his fastball spin rate was always in the 2500s, 2400s. in the last couple starts, so June 16th, that was the Toronto game. That was the last game in Buffalo that he had, where he was down at 23.42 was his spin rate. So that was a decline from his earlier couple of starts. And then the Kansas City game, it was 22.90, which was his lowest in a while. So that it is definitely down. But here's the thing with Cole. I feel like, yeah, he was, a spin rate monster. And of course, he's one of the higher profile guys you're going to see with this whole, crackdown and everything. But I mean, he's also a big velocity guy. He's throwing 97, 98 and getting it up to 100. So, okay, his spin rate was as low as it's been in years, 22.90 in the Kansas City game. The Royals were 1 for 10 against it. So he was still getting it done. And the Blue Jay game too, he had 4 strikeouts and he still carved up Toronto and was
8
able to
innings pitched,
get deep into the game.
Yeah, still did it.
And I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but the spin rate has nothing to do with velocity's sake, correct?
Right. So I think it'll have an effect for certain guys where, and you'll hear people talk about, a fastball that plays up. So you have 2 guys who have, both throw 92. One guy has league average spin rate, and that's going to get hit a little more often. If you have a guy who throws, 92 with a particularly good spin rate, that pitch is going to be perceived by the batter to be faster.
Gotcha.
Because it's going to jump on him a little more. And that's why, that's why teams and pitchers, they want high spin. The higher the spin at the same velocity, the harder it's going to be to hit. But I feel like it's going to affect that guy who, has lower velocity, but is able to play it up higher with good spin compared to somebody like Cole, who is an elite pitcher with elite velocity, who had an elite spin too. But even if that goes down, it's also going to go down for everyone else too. So he would still be one of the better ones.
Yeah,
that was kind of my thought this whole time going into it. I think, elite pitchers will still be elite because, sticky stuff or not, I mean, if it just made every pitcher elite, then, everyone would be elite.
Yeah.
Right. And the thing too is, so if you start, so we're seeing spin rates 25, 2400. When what people have talked about with spider tack and some of these things, they're looking for, humongous decreases when you say, okay, 300 RPM lower, 400 RPMs lower. That's the really significant decline that people are going to be looking out for. Because even if a guy's spin rate is down 100 from a given game or 150, you say, oh, that's lower, but sometimes that happens just in normal pitching. A guy his velocity might be down a couple, a half a mile an hour in a given game too. Even within a game, if somebody throws 60 fastballs in a game, there'll be a range of 200, 300, 400 RPMs between his lowest spin pitch and his highest spin pitch. So when you're looking at the averages, you're looking for kind of like a bigger picture thing. I like that what we've been doing for a couple of the last Cole games is having a graphic. Here's a spin rate from his first 11 or 12 starts. Here it was in this game, here it was in the last game, and here it is so far tonight. So it's giving you an idea, but you do want to be able to step back and say, okay, what's the larger sample? What's the larger picture here?
Yeah. Well, it's definitely like Tyler said. I mean, he's still getting it done, and all the trolls that'll be saying, "Oh, it made Cole is great." I'm looking at the numbers still, and it's still, the one thing with him that's been the kryptonite, and it also was the last night, was the solo bomb, and we have to deal with those throughout. But he's still getting it done, man. It's he's still an elite pitcher. I'm glad we gave him the contract because we know that we needed that number one dude. So it was just all the hysteria. I mean, the thing that the answer did not help him the greatest is what all that kind of just really made it look weird.
But true, but also the larger point there is that is he doing? I think it was more reiterating in a clumsy way that this is not about one particular pitcher or one particular team or one that this was a long time league wide issue And some pitchers like Zach Gallen from the Diamondbacks have talked about how institutionalized it was, where even, executives and coaches on his own team were telling guys, this is what you need to do. And other pitchers have talked about, teams having their own chemists, developing their own, we have to create our own batch of sticky stuff
Crazy
to try and keep up. So if it's something that's widespread and tacitly encouraged and accepted by the league, then you can't blame guys for doing it. And now we're going 180 degrees in the other direction, saying, well, now no one can have anything. And I think that's what the backlash you're having for pitchers is that you're changing the rules on the fly mid-season, and there's very little input on the player side.
Yeah. Also the point of, injury factor, and like Glasnow was saying that it's a big issue there.
This may be a little bit of a reach, but I don't know that, this was obviously something that's been on baseball's mind for, God knows how long. I've been saying, either do something or do nothing, or, give them some sort of substance that, a universal substance. Do you think that there's a possibility MLB could have done this mid-season just to kind of, I hate to say it, but like just piss off the players before the CBA? Is that even a little bit of a, I don't know, that's a little conspiracy theory I got going on, I guess, but
I feel like crazy.
I hear that, and it's a little bit like what Pete Alonso was saying last week, talking about. I mean, this, I don't know if it's this calculating, but he was saying that the league juiced the ball a couple years ago to inflate offense and knock pitchers who were pending free agents with a big class of pitchers, and then they de-juice it because we're going to have some big hitter free agents soon, so we'll depress offensive numbers to try and drive their prices down. I don't think it's that calculating.
I hope
honestly,
not.
I don't think Rob Manfred and Major League Baseball are that good at devising some kind of crazy scheme like this.
Yeah.
But the general point being is that this is a Major League Baseball created problem. And the people that are bearing the brunt of the bad publicity and the ire of fans and the mic under the microscope here are the players. So with that, as far as creating more distrust going into the labor situation at the end of the season, I think that is a big part of it. And I think that's where you saw some of the complaints from people like Max Scherzer saying, have us in the room. And Cole has talked about that too. Cole is on the players committee with the union. Involve the players in creating, because this is a problem that everyone's going to have to get through together.
Yeah.
So should MLB devise come up with a tacky substance for that's like a universal usage thing? Liam Hendricks has mentioned that. That stuff is kind of over my head, but it sounds to a layman, it sounds like a pretty good idea. And that's something that MLB and the players can work on moving forward and say, hey, all right, how do we find a middle ground here?
Yeah. Well,
I'd love to see it.
Yeah. Be interesting. The CBA is going to be very interesting, whatever happens next season. But before we get you to head out here, because we know that you got a big game coming up, we got the whirlwind that is Michael King coming in, and we're going to see what happens with the, I guess he's our starter now. I don't know if we're calling it an opener situation anymore, but this should be interesting. Important game. Obviously, we dropped the Cole game, so we'll see what happens today. But, we know that you got that coming up very soon. So, but what are you expecting from the weekend, possibly in the Boston series? Anything, with this, like me and Tyler have talked about, it's going to be, this, when we start, we were talking about like the 25 game stretch. It's going to be very important for the Yankees heading in prior to the All-Star break and to eventually then to the, trade deadline. Cause we were hoping they get some reinforcements in here. So anything you got, thinking for the Boston series, any stats that you may throw out there that are interesting, or anything coming up to you?
Well, I think the big thing with Boston is, and like over the last few years, is that their offense is always fierce. You're always going to have to worry about JD and Devers and Bogarts. It seems like their pitching has kind of played over their heads during this start. So I think that they are a little due to come back to earth a little bit. Just getting ready for the Royal Series. We were doing just getting some things together for the Kansas City starting pitching and how they've struggled, very much needing Danny Duffy back. But seeing how Kansas City was near the bottom in a lot of pitching categories over the last 3 weeks, Boston is right there with them. Boston, if you go since the middle of that Yankee series, right when the Yankees started to score some runs again, but the Red Sox still swept. Since then, Boston has a starting pitcher ERA over 7. Batters are hitting over 320 against their starting pitching. Their OPS against Boston pitching is over 950. So Evaldi going so long without allowing a home run, Garrett Richards, some of these guys, Nick Pivetta, it seems like maybe they're starting to come back down to earth a little bit, which could give a good opportunity to the Yankee offense. Going into that big series at Fenway.
Yeah, it's gonna be quite the series. First time in Fenway this year. Especially where are we now? 4.5, I think it is back so far.
I think 5.5
at the moment,
today,
something like that. Yeah. So big series coming up, and first we got to handle business. We're recording this prior to the last 2 games of the series, and hopefully they can end up taking care of business versus KC. But James, we appreciate it. We're not gonna keep you too much longer. I do want to shout you out. I heard on the broadcast during the Twins series, great nickname. I think Rucco gave you correct me if I'm wrong, but he said you gave Miguel Andujar the notorious MIG nickname. I thought I heard that. It's because I constantly hear him, throwing you in there and stuff and your stats. And I heard that nickname and I was like, that's clever. That's clever. I know we got the higgy, can't you see thing, but so.
Yeah, because, when we, because our analysts who, you guys know them and love them, but putting together those, the keys to the game or the scouting reports for various things, sometimes you want to have a little fun, like coming up with sometimes it's hard to come up with the little titles, say, okay, here are the things we want to cover. Okay, we want to mention Andujar for this one because he's been doing well lately. All right, so then you kind of just come up with a fun little note or a fun little tag for him. So I didn't know it'd be that popular, but I'm glad it was.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, the Yankees are not short of nicknames and everything. I mean, there's plenty to go out. I feel like Twitter is definitely just a creative avenue for a lot of the Yankee names. But I like that one. It was we'll continue to listen out for any of the stats and stuff. I'm sure they'll mention them either tonight or in the Boston series. But really appreciate you coming on, man. And I know Tyler's made us smarter when it comes to the stats, because like sometimes it's just some of this stuff is just like sometimes it's a little bit too much information that sometimes to retain. But you definitely made us smarter on this podcast. We appreciate you for spending some time with us today, man.
Yeah, thank you, James.
Thank you for having me.